What we can see here seems to be a very, very lucrative target. How this came about we'll see in the Situation Report, June 2nd, 2026. We are in the 5th year, and this is day 100 since the start of the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the Situation Report. My voice is still strained, so please excuse it. In today's report, we'll look at the following. We'll review some interesting attacks, especially on the road of life. We will also look at attacks on Kyiv that the Russians carried out last night. We also have statements from a soldier from a Storm Z unit, basically from a Russian convict unit, and much more. Thank you for the get well wishes in the last 2 reports. Those wishes from the community mean a lot to me. Russia is now struggling not only with problems with diesel and gasoline, but also with kerosene. Colloquially, that's airplane fuel. At the end of May, several major airports, including those in St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and Ufa, were temporarily unable to refuel planes as usual. And we're talking about civilian air traffic here. The situation seems to have become serious. So serious, in fact, that Moscow has now responded. And when that happens, things are really hitting the fan. Kerosene exports were fully banned from June 1st through November. Previously, Russia exported tens of thousands of tons of kerosene every month through ports on the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, as well as by rail to Central Asia. The reason behind this is a mix of several problems. At the same time, in recent months, numerous refineries have been damaged or destroyed by Ukrainian drone attacks or have also been partially shut down for long periods. On the other hand, demand continues to rise, both in the civilian and military sectors. The price trend is particularly striking. While kerosene prices have already risen sharply worldwide due to the situation in the Middle East, prices are now also skyrocketing within Russia itself. At the same time, trading on the Russian energy exchange is increasingly drying up. This is very problematic for Russia because kerosene is not just any raw material. Civil aviation, military airfields, and strategic bomber fleets all depend on the same supply chain. That's exactly why Moscow is now apparently trying to choke off exports first and keep its own supply stable. What's especially interesting again is that the Russian government officially continues to deny any serious shortages, while at the same time introducing export bans and massively expanding subsidies. That fits a pattern we've been seeing more often lately. First, they say there's no problem, and shortly after, more emergency measures follow to fix a problem that supposedly doesn't exist. During the night, the Ilsky refinery in the Krasnodar region was attacked. In the footage, anti-aircraft fire and several explosions can be seen from a distance. The refinery, a key processing facility in southern Russia, has already been targeted multiple times by Ukrainian attacks. The attack is one of many recent incidents targeting Russian refineries, pumping stations, tank farms, and fuel infrastructure. Several energy and logistics sites in Saratov, Kirov, and Krasnodar have come under attack. What is also very interesting here is that on the Russian side, they have long tried to protect important facilities with nets so that drones would land in the nets and not explode at the facility itself. On the Russian side, it has now been recommended or even ordered in some regions to take down these nets again because they are not fireproof and start to burn if a drone explodes there. Instead, they should be able to protect themselves with other firefighting measures, but these are not being provided. That's just a recommendation. Meanwhile, Russia attacked Kyiv again. According to Ukrainian sources, at least 14 people were injured. Residential buildings, a medical facility, a service center, and numerous vehicles were damaged. The contrast could hardly be greater. On one side, we see attacks on refineries, oil pumping stations, and militarily important infrastructure. Russian drones and missiles are again striking residential buildings and other civilian targets in the Ukrainian capital. Although Moscow often claims to target military sites, the images again suggest otherwise. The figures released today by the Ukrainian Air Force once again show how massive the Russian airstrikes have become. A total of 729 aerial targets were reported, of which, according to Ukrainian sources, 642 could be intercepted. The record of the Zircon missiles is particularly striking. Russia used 8 of these hypersonic missiles. Not a single one was intercepted. All 8 broke through the Ukrainian air defenses. With the Iskander-M missiles, 11 out of a total of 33 missiles were intercepted, which still indicates a significant shortage of Patriot interceptor missiles. The interception rate was much better for cruise missiles. 26 out of 27 Ko-101 and 3 out of 5 Kalibr missiles were shot down. Here the Ukrainians have the advantage that these can be intercepted not only by aircraft, but also occasionally by manpads. The success rate was also very high with drones, with 602 drones intercepted. Nevertheless, the impact times show how great the strain on Ukrainian air defense has become. The Zircon remains particularly problematic. The missile was originally developed as an anti-ship weapon and now flies at supersonic speed. Depending on the launch point, the Ukrainians often have only a few minutes to react. That's exactly why these missiles are considered one of the most difficult threats for Ukrainian air defense. Patriot systems could, in principle, counter Zircon missiles. In practice, however, it depends on the availability of the expensive PAC-3 interceptor missiles. That's exactly where one of Ukraine's biggest problems lies. While Russia continues to produce these missiles, and is estimated to have around 200 of them, by now Patriot interceptor missiles remain scarce. Today's statistics make that very clear. With Kh-101 missiles and drones, Ukraine continues to achieve impressive interception rates. But with Zircon missiles, well, not a single one was shot down today. Except, of course, when it was intentional. Unfortunately, this makes this weapon one of the most dangerous components of the Russian arsenal. Russian airsoft truck drivers were lured into an apparent ambush on the vital supply road. A vehicle in front of them was hit, caught fire, and blocked the road, while the same thing happened just a few hundred meters behind them. The vehicles in between are now trapped in a narrow corridor and can't escape. Now they are perfect targets for more drones as long as they are carrying valuable cargo. Most of the time, it's tanker trucks or military trucks that are attacked here. But the kinetic sanctions have definitely had an effect, because here a large number of trucks are gathering at the Kerch Bridge, waiting to be transported. The drivers are hoping to be able to travel by ferry. The bridge itself, as it seems, is currently closed to them. Since the Ukrainians detonated a truck full of hidden explosives on the bridge at the start of the invasion, the Russians have been extremely cautious here when it comes to transporting hazardous materials. But let's be honest, so many tank trucks lined up one after another in one place make an incredibly good target. I wouldn't be surprised if the next drone were to fly right into them. So while people are waiting to be able to transport the fuel to Crimea, people in Crimea are waiting just to be able to see the gas station pumps at all, because the fuel crisis in Crimea keeps getting worse and worse. New footage from Stary Krim near Feodosia shows that the problems are no longer limited to individual cities or gas stations. The logistical blockade is increasingly affecting larger parts of the peninsula, while in Sevastopol long lines have already formed at gas stations, and fuel is only available with restrictions in some cases. Fuel is being rationed, and more places are now reporting supply problems. The situation is visibly worsening week by week. It's especially problematic because several factors are happening at once: attacks on fuel depots, refineries and fuel transports, problems with supply routes through the land corridor, as well as difficulties with transport over the bridge, by rail and by ferries. For the residents of Crimea, the war is becoming more and more noticeable in their daily lives. What seemed like an isolated disruption a few months ago is increasingly developing into a widespread supply problem across the entire peninsula. Who complains about it the most? The soldiers? The residents? No, of course, it's some stupid tourists. What I'm seeing here is so incredibly stupid that it almost hurts to read it out loud. So just imagine, you're going on vacation to an area that has been known for years to be attacked by drones, while for months one fuel depot after another has been blowing up. Here is someone outraged that there is no gasoline, and that they can't enjoy their vacation with 3 children. There is no gasoline, and if you can get some somewhere, it's only with the help of coupons or fuel cards, which they don't have, and which also aren't being sold. Now comes the funniest part. They complain that there are no basic supplies for tourists. Why aren't there basic supplies for tourists? What are we supposed to do with 3 children? Walk? Why is no one thinking about the tourists? That's what the text says. It's so incredibly stupid. First of all, it's your own fault if you go on vacation to Crimea during an ongoing war. Second, the military always comes first, then the residents, then pretty much everyone else, and at the very end of that chain, that's where you end up as a tourist. Normally, Russians, and I have to admit and give them credit for this, are extremely creative. No matter what it's about, they always move forward with extreme improvisation, and you can see that along the entire front. We saw so many things where I thought this is an incredible makeshift solution that I wouldn't have expected from others. I would simply suggest handing over one of the children to the army, then he still has 2 left, and that way he at least gets some money and maybe the privilege of being able to get gas before other people. Besides, the car won't use as much fuel on the way home with 1 less child, and the Russian state gets 1 more soldier. It's a win for everyone involved. A former soldier from the Russian penal unit Storm C is currently causing a stir in the Russian patriotic camp. Daniil Tulenkov believes that Russia missed the opportunity to use the penal unit for a frozen conflict, and that the situation for Moscow could continue to deteriorate in the coming months. In his assessment, Ukrainian long-range attacks and new technologies will now greatly increase the pressure on Russia, so much so that at some point, even demands for a withdrawal to the 1991 borders would no longer be unthinkable. He literally writes that this next phase of real negotiations would be one in which the 1991 borders and many other things that seem absurd today could be discussed openly. His conclusion is especially remarkable. Tulenkov believes that Russia could only escape the war if society accepted that a complete withdrawal from Ukrainian territory is inevitable. The interesting thing about it isn't even whether he's right or not. What's interesting is what he says, because he's not from the liberal or opposition camp, but he himself fought in one of the most notorious Storm C units. So statements like these come from a milieu that had to fight on the front lines under the toughest conditions for a long time. They know the reality of war better than almost anyone else on the Russian side. 2 or 3 years ago, predictions about the imminent capture of more Ukrainian territory still dominated there. Today, some representatives of the same camp are already discussing whether Russia might one day dream of peace within the 1991 borders. This shifting debate alone is highly remarkable. We can see the timeline here. Yes. At first, they said the war could be won in 3 days. That was possible. Then they realized, well, maybe this war could be won in 2024. They didn't manage that either. Then maybe 2025. That didn't happen either. They still haven't taken the Donbass to this day, and it goes on like this. Meanwhile, Russia keeps sticking to its maximum demands. And at some point, the Ukrainians, especially if they keep going like this, will put the Russians under so much logistical pressure that the Ukrainians themselves can say, look, now we're making demands too. And we're not just responding to your demands. We're making our own demands now. And in this case, if things keep going like this and nothing is done about it on the Russian side, at some point, you could even demand the borders of 1991, and that would be the maximum demand. So you could eventually meet in the middle again, which is their point. It appears Putin must find more creative ways to fund his war. According to the portal Electronic Budget, after a meeting with Russian oligarchs, only about 220 billion rubles are flowing into war-related programs as voluntary donations. That amounts to just under 2.5 billion euros. That's a remarkable sum compared to the entire year, where originally about 1.7 billion rubles were planned for such voluntary contributions. But the actual revenues are many times higher than expected. The trigger was said to be a behind-closed-doors meeting on March 26th. There, Putin informed leading businessmen about his intention to continue the war and also made it clear that additional support would bring the economy back to growth. That somehow reminds me of the old Russian tradition of voluntary participation. Officially, no one donates under pressure, but unofficially, you get a call from the Kremlin, you go there, and then you quickly understand what's expected of you. After all, 220 billion rubles don't just come together because suddenly all the oligarchs discover their charitable side for the Kremlin at the same time. It rather seems as if Putin passed around the hat once, and surprisingly, everyone wanted to put something in. Thank you to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algo crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renica, as Fredjo Meyerhofer recalled. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next Situation Report.